Have you ever paused to consider what you truly know about God? Not the version of God shaped by culture, tradition, or convenience, but the God who quietly moves behind the surface of your life. Many claim to believe in God, yet they live as if He is distant or irrelevant. To properly know God is not a matter of memorizing texts, reciting prayers, or following rituals. It is a matter of understanding His essence and allowing that understanding to transform your life. True knowledge of God begins with recognizing that He is not an abstract idea, not a comforting story, not a being to be manipulated for personal gain. He is real, present, and active, and knowing Him requires honesty, a willingness to examine your own heart, to confront the truths you may not like, and to acknowledge where you have misunderstood Him. The pursuit of God is not passive. It demands attention, discernment, and a readiness to learn from all of life's experiences. The signs of His presence are all around us, in nature, in relationships, in the silent stirrings of conscience, and in the moments that shape our character. But knowing God deeply does more than provide comfort. It equips you to live with purpose, make decisions with clarity, and face challenges with courage. Tonight, let us explore what it truly means to know God, to move beyond superficial knowledge, and to engage in a journey that transforms not just your mind, but your soul. This is not an abstract pursuit. It is the path to a life that resonates with truth, meaning, and ultimate fulfillment. Many people speak of God as if He is merely an idea, a distant figure cloaked in tradition or folklore, something to be discussed politely or nodded at during moments of difficulty. But God is not an idea to be debated, nor a concept to be compartmentalized into neat theological boxes. He is a living, active reality, present in ways that we often fail to notice. The first step to truly knowing God is to understand that knowledge of Him cannot be superficial. It is not enough to repeat the words that others have said about God, to memorize doctrines, or to rely solely on inherited beliefs. True knowledge of God is experiential. It demands engagement with His reality, a willingness to observe, reflect, and respond to His presence in the world around us. Many live their entire lives believing they know God because they have accepted a set of teachings, yet their actions, their choices, and their hearts reveal a different story. The difference between knowing about God and knowing God is the difference between seeing a photograph and standing in the presence of the person it depicts. One can study the image endlessly, admire it, even feel some emotion from it, but it cannot compare to the direct encounter, the living awareness of that person's reality. Similarly, understanding God through books or sermons is valuable, but it is insufficient if it does not penetrate the heart, if it does not lead to transformation in thought, behavior, and perception. God is not merely a subject of intellectual curiosity. He is a presence that calls for response, reflection, and recognition. To know God properly, one must begin by observing the world with intentionality. Creation itself is not just a backdrop to human life. It is a medium through which God communicates His character and wisdom. The complexity of life, the intricate balance of nature, the delicate interconnection between all living things, these are all signs pointing to a mind and will beyond human comprehension. Yet, many ignore these signs, distracted by the noise of daily life or lulled into thinking that understanding comes only through books, lectures, or religious instruction. Knowing God requires a sensitivity to the patterns, rhythms, and order that permeate existence. It demands reflection on the extraordinary and the ordinary, on the subtle moments that often pass unnoticed, the silence before dawn, the kindness of a stranger, the resilience of life in the harshest conditions. All of these speak to a reality larger than ourselves, and all of these, if noticed and pondered, draw the mind toward the understanding of God's nature. Knowing God is not merely about recognition of His existence, it is about understanding His character. People often claim to know God but misunderstand His essence, imagining Him as a reflection of human traits, desires, or limitations. They shape Him to fit their own comfort or to justify their choices, turning God into a projection rather than encountering Him as He truly is. God's character, however, is revealed consistently through his actions, both in history and in the ongoing flow of life. He is not capricious or arbitrary. He is consistent, faithful, and bound by the principles of his own nature. To know him is to study these principles, to observe the patterns of justice, mercy, love, and wisdom that define his engagement with the world. It requires patience and humility, for understanding God is never fully complete, yet every genuine insight draws one closer to a living, active relationship rather than a distant theoretical idea. Knowing God properly reshapes the way we perceive reality itself. When one understands that God is a real active presence, life ceases to be a series of random events. Each occurrence, whether joyous or painful, becomes part of a larger tapestry, a reflection of divine wisdom at work. Recognizing this does not eliminate challenges or suffering, but it reframes them as opportunities to engage with God's reality more deeply. The ordinary moments of life, the conversations, the choices, the small acts of kindness, begin to carry weight and significance, for they are moments in which God is present and active. Knowledge of God, then, is not theoretical, it is practical. It shapes decisions, informs morality, and inspires courage. For one who truly knows God understands that their actions matter in the context of a universe guided by His presence. The pursuit of proper knowledge of God is a lifelong endeavor. It cannot be rushed, simplified, or treated lightly. It requires honesty, openness, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about oneself and about the world. Many seek God only when in need, only when life presses hard, and yet God's reality is present even in moments of ease. To know Him is to develop an ongoing awareness, a sensitivity to His movements, and a commitment to live in alignment with His character. It is a journey of discovery that demands thought, reflection, and action. A journey in which intellectual curiosity is married to moral responsibility and observation is married to experience. The difference between knowing about God and knowing God is the difference between life lived in darkness and life illuminated by understanding. And the first step toward that illumination is the recognition that God is not an abstract concept, but a living, present reality calling for our attention, our reflection, and our response. To truly know God, one cannot ignore the importance of self-knowledge, for the understanding of God and the understanding of oneself are deeply intertwined. Many people approach the idea of God as if He exists entirely outside of them, a distant force to be observed, feared, or worshipped, without recognizing that the state of their own heart shapes their ability to perceive Him. We often seek God externally in books, sermons, or sacred spaces, while neglecting the inner landscape of our own minds and souls. Yet God's presence is intimately connected to the condition of our hearts. If we fail to understand our own desires, biases, fears, and weaknesses, we will never properly understand God, because our perception will always be filtered through illusions, preconceptions, and self-deception. Many live their entire lives thinking they know God, but their lives reveal the opposite. They are guided by impulses of pride, resentment, or self-interest, and they mistake these impulses for divine insight. Genuine knowledge of God requires honesty with oneself, the courage to look at one's own limitations, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths that the ego naturally resists. Without this self-awareness, knowledge of God remains superficial, a hollow echo of true understanding rather than the living connection it is meant to be. Self-knowledge is not merely an exercise in introspection. It is an essential gateway to spiritual clarity. People often misunderstand God because they misunderstand themselves, the motives that drive our choices, the hidden fears that shape our actions, the patterns of thought that dictate our responses. All of these act as lenses through which we perceive divinity. A heart clouded by anger, envy, or pride will misread the signs of God's presence, just as a mind unwilling to question its assumptions will misinterpret truth. Therefore, to know God properly, we must cultivate humility, for humility opens the door to self-awareness. It allows us to recognize where we have been blind, where we have been messled by convenience or desire, and where our understanding has been distorted by the noise of the world. without humility. Knowledge of God is limited to what flatters the self, to what reassures rather than challenges, to what comforts rather than transforms. Humility is not weakness. It is the courage to see oneself clearly and to seek God with an honesty that is unafraid of correction or growth. Knowing oneself in relation to God means recognizing the ways in which our lives are entangled with the divine order. Every choice, every habit, every thought is a reflection of our understanding of reality and, by extension, of God. If we are careless with our moral decisions, if we act without reflection, we distance ourselves from the reality of God's presence. But if we seek self-knowledge, if we examine our motivations and align them with principles of truth and justice, we begin to see God more clearly. The human heart is like a lens. When it is clean, transparent, and focused, it allows the light of God's presence to shine through. When it is clouded, distorted, or distracted, the image is blurred and our perception is compromised. Therefore, the journey to knowing God is inseparable from the journey to knowing oneself. Each insight into our own nature illuminates a corresponding truth about the divine, and each moment of honesty and reflection draws us closer to the reality of God's character and presence. In addition, self-knowledge involves understanding the ways in which personal experiences shape spiritual perception. People often assume that knowing God is a matter of acquiring information or following rituals, but it is actually a process of integrating life's lessons with introspection. Our successes, failures, joys, and sorrows all reveal aspects of God's influence in the world, but we can only recognize them if we are aware of our own reactions and growth. A person who refuses to face failure or denial, who refuses to examine the lessons hidden in difficulty, will fail to perceive God's hand at work. Conversely, one who engages in self-reflection, who observes personal responses, and seeks meaning in experiences, cultivates the insight necessary to understand God's guidance. Self-knowledge is therefore both mirror and magnifier. It reflects our true nature, while also magnifying the signs of divine presence in ways that might otherwise go unnoticed. The connection between self-knowledge and knowing God extends to the cultivation of moral and spiritual integrity. The more clearly we understand our weaknesses and our strengths, the better we can align our lives with principles of truth, compassion, and justice. This alignment allows us to encounter God not as a distant observer, but as an intimate reality that informs and shapes our daily existence. Without self-awareness, our faith is shallow, vulnerable to doubt, and easily swayed by superficial interpretations of God. With self-knowledge, however, faith becomes resilient, active, and transformative. It enables us to perceive God with clarity, to respond to His presence with authenticity, and to live a life that reflects both our understanding of ourselves and our understanding of Him. In this way, the journey of knowing God is inseparable from the journey of knowing oneself, for the depths of the human heart are the very terrain in which the reality of God is revealed. God is constantly communicating with us, yet most people fail to notice His messages because they are either distracted or unwilling to listen. The world is full of noise, both external and internal, that drowns out the subtle ways in which God speaks. Many wait for dramatic signs, miraculous events, or moments of thunderous clarity, assuming that divine communication must always be extraordinary to be real. In reality, God speaks in quiet, persistent ways that often go unnoticed by those who are preoccupied with worldly concerns. The chirping of birds at dawn, the rhythm of the tides, the patterns of seasons, and the intricacies of human relationships, all of these are forms of divine communication, embedded in the natural and social order to guide, teach, and reveal His character. Yet if we do not cultivate attentiveness, if we do not slow down and observe, these messages pass by like whispers in a storm. People often live their entire lives thinking God is silent or absent, when in fact He has been speaking continuously, waiting for us to develop the awareness necessary to hear Him. God's communication is not limited to nature. It extends into every aspect of our personal lives. Our conscience, that inner voice that distinguishes right from wrong, is one of the most direct channels through which God speaks. It is easy to ignore or suppress, to rationalize away inconvenient moral promptings. But these nudges are often the clearest indications of God's presence and guidance. When we act against conscience, we experience discomfort, regret, or inner conflict, all of which are reminders that God is calling us toward truth and alignment with His will. Conversely, when we heed the guidance of conscience, even in small, everyday decisions, we participate in a dialogue with God, responding to His direction and allowing it to shape our lives. Understanding God's communication requires not only attention, but also courage, for hearing God often demands that we act, that we choose the difficult right over the easy wrong, and that we take responsibility for aligning our actions with the principles we are learning to perceive. Beyond nature and conscience, God communicates through the circumstances of life itself. Events, challenges, and relationships are not random occurrences. They are part of a divine curriculum designed to teach, refine, and reveal. Many fail to recognize this because they measure reality by convenience or immediate gratification, missing the lessons embedded in trials or the guidance hidden in relationships. A difficult situation may be God's way of strengthening patience, resilience, or wisdom. A friendship that challenges us may be a lesson in empathy, forgiveness, or humility. Even the ordinary sequences of our days carry significance if we are attentive enough to discern patterns, opportunities, and lessons. Life itself becomes a language, and God is its author, speaking continuously to those willing to read, reflect, and respond. Those who are committed to understanding God learn to interpret these signs not superstitiously, but with thoughtful reflection, seeing beyond surface appearances to the deeper realities that shape character and understanding. Recognizing God's communication also demands discernment. Not every impulse or event is divine instruction. Not every coincidence carries meaning beyond its immediate context. To properly hear God, one must develop the ability to distinguish between personal desire, societal influence, random chance, and genuine divine prompting. This requires careful observation, meditation, and the willingness to test impressions against principles of truth, morality, and integrity. The process is not passive, it is active engagement with the world, with oneself, and with the subtle realities of existence. Those who cultivate this discernment gradually become attuned to the patterns of God's guidance, able to recognize His voice amidst the cacophony of competing messages, and capable of responding in ways that align with divine purpose. Knowing God's communication involves persistence and attentiveness over time. It is easy to grow impatient or frustrated when messages are not immediately clear or when understanding seems slow to develop. Yet God often works gradually, shaping comprehension through repeated experiences, reflective observation, and incremental growth. Those who fail to notice the ongoing dialogue may wonder why God seems silent, when in truth the problem lies in their own inattentiveness. To properly know God is to develop sensitivity, to practice listening, to cultivate awareness, and to respond consistently to the subtle prompts of His presence. Life becomes an ongoing conversation, a continuous engagement with the divine, where understanding grows through reflection, experience, and deliberate attention. God's communication is abundant, persistent, and intimate, and those who take the time to recognize it find that the world is never silent, life is never random, and the presence of God is a constant companion, guiding, teaching, and shaping the course of existence in ways both visible and invisible. Faith is often spoken of as the foundation of a spiritual life, yet many misunderstand what true faith entails. Some treat faith as blind acceptance, a passive agreement to ideas without question, reflection, or understanding. This kind of faith is fragile, easily shaken by doubt, hardship, or the challenges that inevitably arise in life. Proper knowledge of God, however, transforms faith from a fragile notion into a resilient, living trust. Faith that is informed, that is rooted in understanding rather than mere repetition, develops strength and depth because it is anchored in reality rather than illusion. When one truly knows God, faith ceases to be a vague hope or a distant aspiration and becomes an active, guiding force that shapes perception, informs decisions, and strengthens the heart against adversity. People often underestimate the power of informed faith. They assume that faith requires only emotion or belief, but in truth, it requires engagement of the mind, reflection on experience, and comprehension of God's nature. Without this engagement, faith risks being superficial, limited, and incapable of sustaining a person when life tests their resilience and character. Informed faith is resilient because it is anchored in understanding. When a person recognizes the consistency, wisdom, and goodness of God, faith is no longer dependent on circumstance. Trials, disappointments, and setbacks do not diminish it. Rather, they become opportunities to deepen trust and reliance on divine guidance. Many falter because they have constructed their understanding of God upon convenience, on partial or distorted information, or on human interpretations that reflect personal desires rather than reality. True knowledge of God removes these distortions, replacing uncertainty with clarity and superstition with insight. Faith rooted in understanding allows one to face the unknown with courage, not because fear is absent, but because the heart is confident in the reality of God's presence and care. This kind of faith is not passive. It requires active participation, reflection, and continual learning, transforming belief into a guiding principle for every choice and action. Informed faith fosters perseverance in the face of life's inevitable challenges. Many people abandon faith when circumstances appear harsh or when prayers seem unanswered, believing that doubt signifies failure. Yet faith that is informed by genuine knowledge of God recognizes that life's difficulties are part of a larger pattern, a divine framework in which growth, character, and understanding are cultivated. Hardship is not a refutation of faith, but a test and a refining process. A person with deep, informed faith understands that God's purposes are often beyond immediate comprehension, and that patience, trust, and steadfastness are essential elements of spiritual maturity. Faith, when properly grounded, transforms suffering into opportunity, trials into teachers, and uncertainty into a chance for strengthened reliance on God. In addition, informed faith shapes moral and practical decision-making. It is not enough to hope for divine favor or to passively pray for guidance. Genuine faith compels action that aligns with divine principles. Understanding God's nature, His justice, mercy, wisdom, and love enables one to act with discernment, courage, and integrity. People who know God are less swayed by popular opinion, fear of failure, or desire for immediate reward because their actions are guided by a framework of understanding that transcends circumstance. Faith becomes a practical tool, informing daily choices, relationships, and responsibilities. It is a dynamic force, alive and active, influencing both the internal life of the mind and the external life of behavior. Faith that is informed by knowledge of God inspires hope, courage, and clarity in ways that blind faith cannot. It equips the believer to face life with confidence, not because the world is free of difficulty, but because they have learned to see God's hand in every situation, to trust in His wisdom, and to rely on His guidance. This faith does not eliminate doubt entirely, but it provides the tools to navigate doubt with discernment, reflection, and a deep sense of trust. It transforms life from a series of random challenges into a coherent journey, guided by the reality of God's presence and the knowledge of His character. Informed faith allows a person to live fully, courageously, and purposefully, knowing that their belief is grounded in understanding, experience, and the consistent evidence of God's reality. In this way, faith becomes more than hope. It becomes vision, strength, and a source of transformative power in the daily journey of life. Knowing God is not merely a theoretical or intellectual pursuit. It is a transformative reality that must impact every aspect of daily life. Many people claim to know God in theory, speaking eloquently about His existence, character, or principles, yet their behavior, decisions, and priorities reflect little evidence of this knowledge. True knowledge of God changes the way a person perceives the world, interacts with others, and approaches challenges. It is not sufficient to admire or respect God from a distance. Knowing him properly demands that life itself be aligned with his principles. A person who understands God cannot remain indifferent to injustice, cruelty, or moral decay. The recognition of God's presence and authority naturally inspires action, guiding one to act with integrity, compassion, and courage in every situation. Knowledge of God shapes priorities, determining what is worthy of attention, effort, and devotion. It informs the choices we make, the relationships we cultivate, and the way we respond to adversity, embedding a moral and spiritual compass in every decision. Living knowledge of God also transforms character. People who genuinely understand God begin to embody qualities that reflect his nature. Patience, humility, mercy, and love are no longer abstract ideals but practical, lived realities. This transformation is gradual, but consistent exposure to and engagement with God's character shapes habits, reactions, and thought patterns. For example, a person who knows God will not respond to anger or insult with equal hostility. Instead, they will act with measured wisdom, guided by an understanding of justice and grace. Similarly, someone who truly knows God will approach success and achievement with gratitude, recognizing that every talent, opportunity, and blessing is ultimately a reflection of divine provision. Knowledge of God creates a moral and spiritual filter through which every decision is passed, ensuring that actions align with values that transcend selfish desires or short-term convenience. It produces a coherence between belief and behavior, between internal convictions and external conduct, which distinguishes those who merely know about God from those who truly know him. The practical effects of knowing God extend into relationships and social responsibilities. When a person understands God's principles, they begin to treat others in ways that reflect divine wisdom and compassion. They become agents of kindness, reconciliation, and justice in their communities, recognizing that their actions carry consequences beyond immediate perception. Knowing God compels one to act ethically, to speak truthfully, and to engage with others with empathy, for such behavior is a direct expression of the understanding of his character. People who live with this knowledge are often quietly influential, shaping the lives of others not through force or manipulation, but through example and integrity. Their lives demonstrate that knowing God is not theoretical. It is active, relational, and practical, influencing every human interaction and contributing to the betterment of society. In addition, knowledge of God impacts the perception of challenges and adversity. Life is inevitably filled with difficulties, uncertainties, and suffering. Yet a person who knows God perceives these moments differently. They are no longer purely obstacles or threats. They become opportunities to exercise discernment, patience, and moral courage. Understanding God's involvement in the world and his guidance in individual lives allows one to approach trials with perspective and hope. Challenges become lessons, setbacks become sources of growth, and suffering becomes meaningful when viewed through the lens of God's character. Knowledge of God transforms despair into resilience, fear into courage, and confusion into clarity, providing a foundation for mental, emotional, and spiritual stability. Living knowledge of God fosters purpose and meaning in life. When a person knows God, every action, thought, and decision is informed by an understanding of their role in the larger divine order. Life is no longer a series of random events or accidental choices. It becomes a coherent journey guided by insight, moral principles, and the recognition of God's presence in every aspect of existence. This knowledge motivates excellence, inspires compassion, and instills a sense of responsibility that extends beyond personal gain. Knowing God fully engages the mind, heart, and soul, transforming ordinary living into purposeful existence. It ensures that faith is not idle, that belief is not superficial, and that spirituality is not detached from reality. True knowledge of God is a living, practical force that shapes daily behavior, transforms character, and aligns life with higher principles, making each moment an opportunity to reflect divine truth, wisdom, and love in the world.